Cora Corré. Welcome to Fashion Forensics.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You've grown into the world of fashion and design, and you actually made your runway debut at the age of 4 for your grandmother's, Vivienne Westwood's 2001 show. Ever since then, you've pursued modeling, you've pursued activism, and you've created the Vivienne Foundation. You honor her legacy by empowering communities and working on different projects across the world, helping charities, providing aid to displaced people and emergency response funds. Your multifaceted life has been devoting to speaking up and developing a safe space for different communities. So, my first question naturally would be, how would you describe yourself?
How would I describe myself? I think I am calm. I always have a calmness about me. But I'm very clear-minded. I'm like the most indecisive, clear-minded person ever, which is a crazy thing to say. But yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question. You kind of have to ask your friends, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially with you, you wear many hats across many different things in your life. So, does that sometimes get overwhelming, or have you always been kind of fiercely determined in your
No,
life?
I think growing up, a as I'm sure everyone in life kind of experiences and how you, like, navigate yourself through different moments, you learn so much about yourself. So I think I've always held qualities that I think maybe people see on the surface, but kind of navigating through those over time and like creating a sense of like sureness of yourself. Naturally, you go through stages as a teenager, as a girl, body image, all of those things. And I think there's moments where you question those kind of clear characteristics that I've probably always possessed.
Yeah. And when you think about your very kind of first touch points with your visual identities, do you have a certain moment in your life where for the first time you were like, oh, this is going to become part of my visual identity, something that you loved or something that you saw and it just stuck with you throughout your life?
Not honestly, I would love to say yeah. I think just like working out what makes me feel good on the inside. I think there's so much to be said about, you can be given the most incredible dress in the world and you can put it on and you can have your makeup and hair done. But like, if I look back at my life and points where I was unhappy or like whatever, like insecure, whatever it might be, for me, I can see that. Whereas when I and where I have spent so much time kind of taking care of myself, like in my personal life, I think that is always like the thing. And that's what for me defines my style and how I like look from the outside in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And did you, as a child or as a teenager, did you go through different phases of getting different references and subcultures? What were you like when you were kind of starting to build your own visual identity and your own identity in life as well?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I definitely went through phases and stages. I also like I'm quite tall. I'm 5'10", but I was always tall and I definitely as a child and through to being a teenager like navigated like growing and then also going through stages of like my weight changing and stuff. And I think so that was always something interesting. And I think that naturally then kind of navigates how you dress. I spent a lot of time when I was younger, like, I guess, I don't know. I think I was put in little cute, very pretty dresses of Mary Janes
Yeah.
when I was a little girl by my parents. And then naturally, when I got to like 10, 11, then that's literally the last thing I wanted to wear. And I wouldn't say I've ever gone back to the floral dresses and the Mary Janes, but,
Yeah.
I think all of that kind of forms you as a person. And then as a teenager, I had like the thinnest eyebrows, the craziest makeup. And yeah, I think it was all kind of part and parcel of how you kind of work out how you feel, what you feel good in, and all of those things. But I really wasn't kind of driven by kind of fashion and the fashion background that I think people probably have the expectation took kind of such an influence in my life. I actually didn't have that. I kind of was the opposite.
You kind of
Um,
rebelled against, you
yeah,
rebelled against the rebellion.
yeah, definitely. And now it's so funny because, I steal my mum's clothes. And I think if I look back as me as a little girl, if you asked me if I would ever take anything from her wardrobe, I'd be like, no way. Like, no.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think being rebellious as a teenager, no matter what side of fashion or even what side of background you come from, like for example, my parents had nothing to do with fashion. So my rebellion, I found rebellion within fashion and I found
Yeah.
myself within it. So I think it's such an essential part of the human experience to kind of be like, I'm gonna carve my own way and I'm gonna carve my own point of view.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to. I think even through like what I decided I was interested in at school, like, and I'll get into it, but like, I decided that I was interested in subjects which veered so far from creativity. And I think that is your rebellion in some ways. Like, what you live in and what your reality is, then kind of how you rebel.
Yeah. And the images, so speaking about your 5 images, you chose images that are a very interesting balance between kind of inspiration that led you throughout your life and you
Mhm.
grew up with, and also personal images.
Mhm.
And what was the kind of first thought you had when I asked you to select your 5 images?
I thought, "Oh my god." I'm gonna be so bad at this, is what I actually thought. I think it's really hard. I think also for me, when I kind of read the Inspire and I watched the incredible other episodes that have been released, I think for me, I'm constantly inspired and I'm inspired day to day. So the idea to reduce it to 5 images felt really scary, but actually then the process of doing so, when I sat down to do it was kind of really amazing. I feel like you got me to think in a way which I hadn't, and so that was really nice. Now I'm like, "Okay, I've kind of learned something and been inspired even from the kind of question you asked in that activity."
I mean, if we want to start with the very first image that you chose, it's an image. It's kind of like it's still from a video, from a home video, from
Yeah.
what I see, and it's you as a baby.
Yeah, so it was
Tell me a little bit about why you chose to start with this image.
so my uncle, Ben Westwood, thankfully, took this home video. So this is a screen grab, and it's kind of a random one. I was like, there was no kind of frame where all 4 generations of women were in it, but this is from a home video on Easter weekend, I believe, where my grandmother Vivienne used to live in Surley Court in South London, and it's also actually the flat that my father grew up in with Malcolm and Vivienne and his brother Ben, and my grandma lived there up until the 2000s, actually. So I think for me, this video is so significant in the placement and location of it, which is where my dad grew up, and it's this teeny tiny flat. Um, and this room, actually, there's an image of my grandfather Malcolm and Vivian kind of with some of their earliest work, which they created together with my dad sat on the bed. And actually, in this video, we are having Easter lunch. But if you watch the actual footage, on this side of the table where I'm sat in the image, and my grandmother and my mum, whose lap I'm sat on, were actually sat on their bed, and the dining table's been put there because that was the biggest room in the flat.
Wow.
So yeah.
I mean, you speak a lot about how you were raised by really powerful and confident women, and that played a big role in your life and how you kind of attacked the world. Tell me a little bit about how it was to grow up with
Well,
those women in your life.
yeah, I mean, it's such so there's 4 generations of women within this video, and I mean, I think women and men, are incredible, and I think the human race as a whole is incredible, but I think for me, seeing kind of my great-grandmother Dora and Vivienne grew up north, they were from a little town between Manchester and Stockport, which is where my grandmother's actually now buried. And my grandma came from a working class family, and they actually moved down to London. My great grandparents kind of used to open post offices. And yeah, they moved down to London. And I think for me, you know, people ask me a lot about my grandma Vivienne. And I think for me, obviously, the women that brought her up is so important. And
Yeah.
that goes and is mirrored on the other side of my family too. Um, and I think growing up around women has made me really realize how incredible they are, but also how much we should support and celebrate one another. I think when you go through school and stuff,
Yeah.
girls, appearance, image, people compete with each other. And I think there's not enough empowerment and support of one another generally, but also specifically within that
Yeah.
kind of dynamic. And I was very lucky and was brought up with women supporting women, and that was very much reflective in the 4 generations on both sides that I grew up with. And it's been incredibly inspiring, and I think for me is such a big part of me.
Yeah. And it
And
fuels you throughout life. And
yeah,
it also I
definitely.
think it fueled you to create the Vivienne Foundation, which has become like your baby, and you're
Yeah.
and tell me a little bit about the decision behind honoring Vivienne's legacy and continuing it through the foundation.
So this is something, which I don't think people are very much aware of, but the Vivienne Foundation was actually set up by Vivienne herself in
Interesting.
2019. She's always been seen first and foremost as a fashion designer, but she very much utilized that platform to kind of disseminate her ideas and kind of push her activism and politics and kind of speak up for people, I guess, who don't have a voice. And she very much saw the kind of value in whether it was her winning a Lifetime Achievement Award. She'd be like, okay, I'll accept it because I want to go stand on that stage and I want to talk to you about something that you otherwise won't listen to. And so actually the Vivienne Foundation was kind of something she founded to kind of be the place to disseminate those ideas and be the advocacy which she kind of pushed so much through her fashion platform. And it's kind of the baby and building of that.
Yeah.
So it's actually something I was very lucky to work on with her, and also my dad and my uncle. And the idea was for the foundation to create collections to raise funding as a not-for-profit to then be able to fund NGOs. And she did design a collection which is incredibly full and rich of, insane designs. Sadly, it is now her one and only collection, but that is something she finished, and she worked up she worked on it really up until her last moments. And I think whilst we kind of navigate how precious that now is and work out how we'd like to distribute that and show that for the first time, in the meantime, we very much aim to kind of get on and support the causes that were so important to her.
Yeah, and I can think that that is something that we've seen throughout the entire life. We recently had Luca from Jordan Luca, who was
Yeah,
working with
I
Vivienne for so
saw.
many years, and he was saying that Vivienne saw past fashion as just a community. She saw using fashion as a motorway to her message, to the message of humankind, and being responsible for the world that we live in. Because I think that is something that I also have taken from her studying her work.
Yeah.
And how have you taken that kind of building blocks of the foundation, and how have you taken it now to the present day in 2025, and where do you want to see it go with the Vivienne Foundation?
I think it's such a kind of, she first and foremost is my grandmother. And I think for me, there's no rush in regards to kind of where we take it. And I think it's something, as it is a family kind of organization, working that out. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I want to be able to, I'm very aware of my privilege of just being able to have a voice. And I think for me, you really have to utilize your platform and that privilege that you have to speak up for people who don't have a voice. And the foundation's based around 4 pillars. And I really want to work on just supporting grassroots organizations around those. Um, and I guess this will come out in a timely way with what I'm about to say. But she actually very much worked on this T-shirt blank, which kind of has like a cowl neck, with the idea to print some of her incredible graphics. She very much saw the value in some of her kind of iconic earlier works, and then her ideas of kind of merging those with her like activism slogans. And so we have been working on, in the meantime, whilst we navigate that full collection and how best to distribute it, I know that she would be in our ears being like, get on and do something, especially sadly with the current state of the world. So we have decided, with those T-shirt blanks, which is stock that exists, we are going to print 4 of kind of her works that the foundation owns, and raise money for a grassroots organization under each pillar.
I
So
mean,
that's exciting.
that's so amazing how you've taken the core of that spirit
Yeah,
of.
also the idea that she would not be okay with us having stock lying around. And
Yeah.
so it very much felt like this very special and exciting thing to do.
I think what you do with the Vivienne Foundation, and how you've also positioned yourself, as a young woman in this industry with a voice and speaking up, I think that's so empowering, because so many people are following your kind of model of what it means to follow your voice and follow your heart. And that kind of brings me to the next image which you chose. Is you talked a lot about, in our kind of conversation before, you talked about Nina Simone, and how you remember that it wasn't just for the voice, but it was about who this person was. So speaking about powerful women that you look up to,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about why Nina Simone's Forbidden Fruit album cover is one of your images that you chose.
So, when I was when you asked me to come on here, and I was thinking about the word inspiring, and I was like, God, like, it's such a big word. And I think for me, Nina Simone as a little girl, if you kind of pull away my background and the context of that, as a little girl, Nina Simone, first and foremost is as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know loads about music or call myself an expert on it, but she first and foremost has one of the most incredible voices I've ever heard. And as I was younger, or when I was younger, my dad would kind of talk to me about Nina Simone, and, you know, she was very prolific within the civil rights movement. Um, and I think for me, kind of discovering her music was very inspiring. I think she's one of the first artists, or creatives, let's say, that, you know, she had her music, but it was also very much her platform and kind of her own form of protest. And so I chose this because she's one of the people that I first recognized of merging and utilizing her platform in that way.
And I think it's very interesting you talk about her because again we speak about the idea of using your voice as a form of protest, as a form of speaking up for those who don't have a voice. Do you have any other artists that you remember kind of listening to or watching that really inspired you?
No, she really was like, for me, I was like, I remember being so blown away by her voice originally when I was little, and then kind of learning about her where this was her protest. It was actually kind of pushed down a lot of the time.
Yeah, and only kind of celebrated in a way post-mortem. I think her work
Yeah,
it's one of those iconic works that people are only now starting to unpack the full
yeah,
the full idea behind it,
yeah, and
and
I
how
think,
empowering it is.
yeah, I mean, she's just an empowering, her voice is, like, out of this world, and then I think, yeah, her work in regards to civil rights movement and the way in which she incorporated that within her kind of more jazzy album and artistry, for me, is just, yeah, one of the biggest inspirations.
And speaking about people that you kind of left an impression on you, your next image is actually quite interesting because it's Martin Parr's donut image.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Is it a donut?
it's
I
kind of
don't know
I
what
see
it
it as
is. I actually
it's like
don't
an
know what
eclair
it is.
donut to me, but again, it's I think it's very much up for interpretation. But you used to kind of say that these were postcards that your mom would write
Yeah,
for birthdays.
so when I was little, there was a few. There's also one which is like these cakes which kind of look like little piglets. It's another Martin Parr picture, but we clearly had um a load of these as postcards, which she'd kind of write when I had to like go to a birthday party when I was a little girl.
I mean,
Um
how iconic a Martin Parr postcard. I think that's so beautiful to have.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we've sadly now don't have any left. But so this is such a like image visually for me in my brain. And I touched on it earlier, but you know, as you become a teenager and you want to rebel and you want to do different things or not what maybe the people in your family do, I very much kind of steered away from anything creative. But the one thing I did do was when I was in sixth form, so at the age of 16, I chose to do photography for A level. And I remember being sent to an exhibition as my homework. And I saw this and I was like, oh my God, wait.
What a
Like,
moment.
I didn't know who Martin Parr was within any other context other than like these kind of sickly looking cakes. And I think for me, the reason I chose this image is actually because this was a point of discovery. I identified it in a gallery where this was one of his many works. And I then was kind of exposed to all of his work, which really sparked an interest and curiosity for me of imagery that I hadn't seen of his, which was kind of around cultures and subcultures and like societal kind of norms and the the UK through times, through his black and white photography, through his color photography. And I think for me, it was a really big moment that where I'd kind of maybe put this line myself between kind of creativity and like politics and like academic subjects, I
Yeah.
suppose.
And how it
It
bleeds all
was kind
together.
of a moment for me where I was like, wow, like this actually is making my brain really like explore these like subcultures. And I was doing sociology at the time. And so it was for me kind of a fused moment of like photography and creativity and like documentation, mixed with my kind of interest in politics and sociology. And yeah, it's a really big moment, but it went back to me being a little girl
It almost
and
felt like
my
a
mum. Yeah.
full circle moment. Tell me a little bit about those formative years of you sparking that interest in sociology, politics, because you've kind of taken those years and it's very applicable to your work now, that you've taken that interest in the world.
Yeah.
How was it like to first discover that and start learning about it?
I mean, I think the interesting thing for me is I think often people veer their questions around my upbringing around this kind of glamorous um, fashion upbringing of, beautiful gowns and kind of all of that stuff. But, the truth is, our kind of family, private, personal moments were very much kind of steered around politics, what was going on in current affairs. I went to my first protest when I was about 3 or 4 years old. We I attended the protest against the war in Iraq as a little girl. So it was very much kind of the politics, and that side was very much kind of a day-to-day topical conversation within our household. And I think naturally you kind of absorb those moments even as a little child, and start to kind of form your own interests. And I think for me, a big thing was, which is why it's even more interesting that I kind of veered away from anything creative. Um, I was very much treated like an adult in the way that I was allowed the space to kind of form my own opinions,
Yeah.
and no one's were ever really forced upon me. I was an only child, so I was around a lot of adults, and I'm an observer. I am actually quite introverted, and I usually sit back and like
And look at
observe
the situation
and
in the
like
room.
understand before, like, I can be really shy, and then I like observe and sit back and absorb. And I think that was very much part of my childhood and kind of the formative years, which you touched on as to where I am now.
How do you nowadays find the balance between the extroverted person, when you do modeling, when you work on the more creative side of things, and
Mm.
then your introverted side, which is, all about research and it's all about speaking about politics or being interested in politics. Would you say you have found a balance to balance those two, or how does it work?
I think so. I think, I have had some incredible opportunities in regards to modeling and, being within the fashion industry or welcomed into it. Um, I think, what have I learned? The only thing I would say in regards to balance is I listen to myself. I think, especially within the fashion industry, a lot of the premise around modeling is the way you look.
Hmm.
And I know if I'm not feeling 100%, and there's room for like a wobble, let's say, or like for you to lose your balance. If you think about it as your mindset, I decide to maybe not take that opportunity or not attend that event, because if I'm not feeling 100% and then someone else isn't feeling great, I think it can really affect your kind of
Yeah.
stronghold. And I kind of see myself as that. So that's how I found my balance, I think, as being like, I think of my brain as like my stronghold. And if it's not there or it's not having its best day, that's okay. But I definitely tend to steer away from anything that I think might shake that further.
I think it's very important when you talk about how you need to have this like balance, and you need to know where your center is,
Yeah.
because even in my experience within the industry from a different point of view, we oftentimes sometimes can get so sidelined and everything feels like it's going 100 miles an hour, that being able to ground yourself and kind of go back into real life, especially I think when you work with so many incredible designers, or you see shows, or you work with collections and you build these beautiful worlds, sometimes you can get lost in them without grounding
Yeah.
yourself. So I think finding your home within both sides and kind of allowing both sides to exist next to each other is so important.
So important. I think they're part and parcel to one another. And I think, I'm also very aware of like how incredibly lucky I am and, privileged. And so, but I always try to also remind myself, you can't kind of bring people up with you if you're not feeling your best. And the only way you can really give and be able to support people in whatever avenue that might be is if you're kind of there and you're present and feeling good in yourself.
Speaking about adolescence and kind of creating your own sense of self, you also, for your next image, you chose the Great Rock and Roll Swindle film poster, which also includes music by the iconic Sex Pistols. And you really, when you talked about this image in when you sent it to me, you said that this was definitely your part of your formative years. Tell me a little bit why you chose it.
So, my grandfather was the manager of the Sex Pistols, and I guess when I was little, I was allowed to watch it. It's probably
Very
not what
rebellious.
was Yeah, I got to watch it. And it's funny, when I was at school, when I was at primary school, I still to this day, by the way, I hate getting in trouble. I just don't like it. So I kind of used to be kind of pretty well behaved. I actually used to be head librarian at primary school, and I was a bit of a nerd. I probably still am secretly. And this is funny for me because I remember watching this film, and I was 10 years old. And then I think I turned 11 that year. So I was in year 6, and we had to do an English speaking board exam.
Oh,
And
wow.
in your English speaking board exam, you are allowed to pick anything. So imagine saying to a 11-year-old, okay, you can pick anything you want. And for some reason, I decided, I went, ugh, as if we can pick anything. And I guess for me, this is so important because this was a moment where I decided to challenge, I guess, the constraints of, an establishment that is school,
Yeah.
and be like, okay, so I want to do my English speaking board exam on the Sex Pistols. And I probably, if I look back at it, I thought they were going to be like, no way. And they let me do it. And I think what's so interesting is I was such a little like goody two shoes and kind of this girl. And I guess that was my own kind of building block of myself and my form of, I guess, or in my first instant of like challenging
Hmm.
people and seeing where I could go with it. And so, I think where I had been, this kind of shy little girl, this was kind of such a formative part of my life because it was the first moment I kind of decided to challenge
Yeah.
the
To step out of it.
establishment that was my teachers.
And do you remember much of that whole experience on the day that you actually had to do
Okay,
the
so the
exam?
craziest thing is I went to this primary school that was very traditional. There were 9 boys and 9 girls in every class, and actually, when we were 11 years old, we were divided into 2. So we were divided into classes by girls and boys, as girls typically used to go on to a girls' school at the age of 11, and boys would stay on till 13 and then apply to go to boarding school. I went to like a really traditional private primary school, basically. And so the funniest thing is all the teachers were very uptight and conservative. And when I watched The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, my French teacher, who I found terrifying, was actually in The Great Rock and
Oh
Roll
my God.
Swindle, playing the piano in this scene. So the other part of me was like so excited to be able to show a clip with
Yeah.
this teacher that we were all like terrified of, who actually like was in this like crazy film.
Yeah. And completely
So
different part, completely different side of that
yeah.
person.
So yeah, that was a moment for sure.
And how have you taken that kind of act of rebellion? Do you remember any other instances in your teenage years where you were kind of challenging what people were saying to you, or like have you ever experienced that growing up where people were trying to always put you in a box or put you in a frame? I think a lot of people and a lot of us from a young age always tried to use that rebellion to kind of show people that we're not who they think we are. Have you had those experiences growing up?
Not really. I think, I actually really, fortunately haven't. I think people are always going to think what they're going to think about you at the
Hmm.
end of the day. Um, and so I've never been that conscious of kind of assumptions made about me as an individual. I think, you know, one of the relationships that I have, was with my grandmother Vivienne, the reason that our relationship flourished in the way it did is as a teenager, I used to challenge her. I used to, she used to say something and I'd challenge it. Or, I was going through a stage where, I loved my Adidas zip up, which I still do. Um, you know, and sportswear was not something she liked. But I think, you kind of build and you learn so much more from the relationships where there's a safe space to challenge one another, because
Yeah.
it's like ping-ponging your thoughts and opinions. And I was super lucky in my entire family to kind of be treated as an adult in a way that I wasn't put down for saying something. And I think that really always opened me up so much more to then wanting to learn and listen.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when you're pushed down, when you say something or you feel undermined, it can shut you off so much and shut off the opportunity where you could take something away, even if it's not something you agree with. And
Yeah, I think that's such an essential part, and what I hope people would start doing more within generations and within families is that to understand that we all can have different opinions as long as we have the mutual respect there. And I think that's so integral to when you're developing as a child or as a teenager, because you have a safe space to explore those ideas. I also think
yeah,
that the reason why you've carried these two sides to you, which you're kind of, you said you're goody two shoes, but at the same time you can be rebellion, is because you had the space to do it, the emotional space to
yeah.
hold it both.
And, I am aware how lucky I was to be able to kind of exercise and explore um, that element.
Your last image, which you sent me, was actually very exciting, and I was very curious to ask you about. Is you sent me a picture of a drawing that your friend made for you on the side of an envelope, and you said it really reflects change and kindness. So I want to ask you about it. Why did you decide to include this image?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about what inspires me, and So, for context, I had ordered a piece of clothing from my friend Adrian Schachter's brand, Adrian Cashmere. I'd ordered someone a gift, and it was actually just maybe a few months after my grandma had actually passed away. And I was like, I'm always really last minute because I'm an organized, disorganized person. And so I was like, "Please, can you, like, rush it from New York? Like, can you give it to someone to give me so I, like, can get it in time to give as a gift, for someone's birthday?" Anyway, this is just actually a, brown envelope, which the item I had ordered came in, and it arrived, and he'd drawn this very sweet heart on it and also a little message, and I always think about it. I think, kindness is so important, and this image reflects that for me, even though it's a picture of the side of an envelope. I think for me, kindness is one of the most inspiring things. I think it's so easy to be kind. It takes so much to be unkind, actually. Like, the amount of kind of energy you take up to not be nice to someone or, you know, I think is so crazy. So for me, this is so continuously inspiring because, you know, we all need to be kind. I think kindness in previous generations has maybe been determined as a weakness. It's not, it's a strength. And I think you can apply it to all avenues of your life. And, people will probably be like, oh, that sounds so naive. But, I think it's cool to be kind. And, within every industry where we've crossed paths and how we originally met is within the fashion industry. And, you know, it's cool to be kind. And kindness is one of the most important things. And I think where you kind of follow your heart and you have love there, I think when you apply that to anything you do, you're going to come away feeling fulfilled in some way.
I think it always shines through as well because, we spoke with a few people on this season about how, the fashion industry is a lot of us misfits and a lot of us kind of strange kids coming together. And the one thing that I have learned is that, like, especially with the state of the world now, we all of us have all of these mini communities or small communities
Mm.
where we are a part of, but we need to support each other and we need to be kind to each other in those
Yeah,
communities. We
I
need to
think,
nurture our communities.
it goes back to this idea I touched on earlier. I think people often behave badly or don't behave with kindness out of their own fear. I think, within fashion, but also kind of any other industry, you're kind of built to think these things are like it's competitive,
Yeah.
essentially,
Yeah.
achieving in itself. And the way we're, through school, like taught to be high achievers, essentially you're going against, the kids you sit next to at school. And I think rather than helping one another, and I think for me, you know, especially within this industry, and I know you've had your own experiences, like, people are kind of so scared of their own security within their position
Yeah.
that they think that being kind and supportive of one another and uplifting will affect them negatively. And I think it's, product of insecurity, essentially. And we've got to move away from that because I think, people can uplift and bring each other up. And I think if you look at your family and your close friends and those relationships that you cherish dear to you, they all work because you lift one another up. And there is no reason why that shouldn't work in any kind of avenue, whether it's work related or not. And so, yeah, kindness is so important.
How do you see the future for yourself and for, our generation? Kind of how do you see the future?
I mean, in regards to like the current affairs in the world, I think it's pretty bleak, but I also hold out hope. I think supporting one another um is so important on every level. Um and I actually do think I feel more inspired than ever by other people, their advocacy, whether it's for their mental health or, a humanitarian crisis which is going on in the world, and the way people are now actually really using their platforms to shed light on those issues, I think is actually really hopeful. And in a way, although there's so many horrible things going on, I think there's definitely more of a sense of togetherness within our generation. And for me, that's hopeful and that looks to a positive future.
Cora Corré, thank you so much for being on Fashion Forensics.
Thank you so much for having me.